Your dog hits the fence line and something shifts. Their eyes lock onto the neighbor's dog, their body drops low, and then they are off. Sprinting, spinning, barking. And you are standing there thinking they just need to burn off energy. But here's what's actually happening beneath that frantic run your dog isn't exercising. They're caught in a neurological feedback loop that floods their brain with adrenaline and dopamine, eroding their impulse control every single time. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to interrupt that cycle, rebuild their self-regulation, and give you back a dog who can actually exist calmly in their own yard. Let me guess how this usually goes. You let your dog out into the yard, expecting them to sniff around, maybe roll in the grass, do their business. Instead, the moment they catch movement on the other side of the fence, they are gone. Full sprint, back and forth, barking like the fence is the only thing standing between them and the apocalypse. You call their name. Nothing. You walk toward them. They do not even register you exist. So you do what makes sense. You try to tire them out. Longer walks, more fetch, extra playtime. And for maybe 20 minutes afterward, things are calm. But the next day, the fence running is worse. Louder, faster, more intense. That pattern isn't a coincidence, and it is not a discipline problem either. What you are actually watching is a dog whose brain has been chemically rewired by repetition. The fence run isn't releasing tension. It's building it. And the more it happens, the deeper that groove gets carved into your dog's nervous system. In this video, I am going to walk you through the science of why this behavior is so sticky, why the most common fixes make it worse. And then I am going to give you a 3-part framework to interrupt the loop, redirect the energy, and retrain your dog's brain from the ground up. This is going to take some patience. But if you follow this through, you will have a fundamentally different dog in that yard. Let us start with the science, because once you understand what's happening inside your dog's brain, everything else clicks into place. When your dog spots movement at the fence, whether it is a dog, a jogger, a squirrel, or a blowing plastic bag, their amygdala fires. That's the threat detection center. It sends an emergency signal that dumps adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream in under a second. Your dog's heart rate spikes. Their muscles load with blood. Every sensory system sharpens to a razor edge. And then they run. Here's where it gets interesting. That sprint along the fence also triggers a dopamine release. Dopamine is the brain's reward chemical, not a pleasure chemical, specifically, but an anticipation chemical. It's the hit you get when you are about to get something good. So your dog isn't just stressed. They're also, in a neurologically measurable way, getting a reward from the behavior itself. The fence run becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Trigger, arousal, sprint, dopamine hit, brief relief, reset. And because the brain is always trying to be efficient, it starts to automate this sequence. It carves it in. Every time the loop runs, the neural pathway gets a little deeper, a little faster, a little more automatic. This is why calling your dog's name does nothing in that moment. Their prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for listening to you, weighing consequences, and making thoughtful decisions, has essentially gone offline. You're talking to a dog who is running on pure limbic system, pure instinct and chemical reward. And this is also why exercise alone makes it worse. When you take a dog who is already running a high arousal loop and add more physical intensity, you are not draining the system. You're training the system to handle more arousal. You're building a dog who is better at being reactive, not less reactive. So what do you actually do? You work in 3 phases. Environmental management first, then physical interruption, and finally, the piece most people skip entirely: cognitive pattern interrupters. Let us talk about environmental management quickly, because you cannot train a dog out of a habit while the habit is still running on repeat every single day. The first step is simple. Reduce unsupervised fence access. This isn't punishment, it's neurological hygiene. Every time your dog runs the fence alone, the loop runs without you there to interrupt it. The pathway gets reinforced. You need to be present, or the fence needs to be temporarily unavailable. For some yards, this means blocking visual access at the base of the fence with solid panels, garden edging, or even temporary lattice. You do not need to block the whole fence. The trigger is usually a specific zone where the neighbor's dog appears or where pedestrians walk by. Block that window and you remove 80% of the triggering events. You might also consider rearranging where your dog spends their outdoor time. A long line tethered to a central point in the yard keeps them away from the fence line without confining them indoors. It's a bridge tool, not a permanent fix. Now, once you have the environment controlled enough that the loop isn't running 20 times a day on its own, you can actually start to intervene effectively. Physical interruption is phase 2. And this is where people usually camp out and never move past. They learn to call their dog away. They use a leash to redirect. They throw a ball to break the focus. These are useful, but they address the behavior, not the brain state. You need both. Here's what physical interruption done well looks like. The moment your dog begins to orient toward the fence, before the sprint starts, you move. Not toward the fence, toward your dog. Your energy needs to be calm and clear, not panicked or frustrated. You interrupt the visual lock by stepping into their line of sight. You attach a leash if they are already ramping. And then you move them. Not just away from the fence, but into a different sensory environment entirely if possible. Into the house, around the corner of the building, behind a visual barrier. The goal is to break the stimulus before the loop fully engages. Because once your dog is mid-sprint, your window has closed. You're chasing the back end of a freight train at that point. Timing is everything here. Learn what your dog looks like in the second before they break into the run. For most dogs, there's a full-body stillness, a telescoping of the neck forward, a weight shift to the front feet. That's your window. That half second of loading is your opportunity. But again, physical interruption is a management tool. It keeps the loop from running. It doesn't replace the loop with something better. That's what phase 3 is for. Cognitive pattern interrupters. This is the actual rewiring. Here's the key insight. Your dog's brain, in that triggered state, is running on its emotional system. The amygdala is in charge. The prefrontal cortex is sidelined. Your job is to give the prefrontal cortex a reason to come back online. And the way you do that is by demanding a cognitive task. Think about it this way. When you are furious and someone hands you a genuinely complex math problem, something shifts. Your anger doesn't disappear, but your brain has to engage a different system to process the problem. The emotional flood narrows just enough for rational thought to get a foothold. That's exactly the mechanism you are exploiting here. The first tool is the brain game at the fence line. Instead of waiting for the fence behavior to happen and then reacting, you are going to start proactively bringing training sessions to the fence line when it is quiet. Get your highest value treats, the ones your dog would do absolutely anything for, and work in that space during low trigger moments. Set up sniff games right along the fence. Scatter small pieces of food in the grass and ask your dog to find them. Sniffing engages the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, and it is cognitively demanding in a way that directly competes with the arousal response. You are teaching your dog that this space, the fence zone, is a place where calm, thoughtful behavior pays off. You can also use slow-feeding tools like lick mats or frozen chews placed near, but not at the fence line, and progressively moved closer as your dog's tolerance builds. The chewing and licking behaviors trigger serotonin release. You are literally changing the neurochemistry associated with that location. Do this consistently for 1 to 2 weeks before you try anything more demanding. You're laying down a new emotional baseline for that space. The second tool is rapid-fire obedience sequencing. This is something most people miss entirely. When your dog is in a mild state of arousal, not full meltdown but clearly aware of the fence, you are going to run them through a rapid sequence of known cues. Sit, down, sit, spin, touch, down, sit, stay. You're not doing this to distract them in the way that waving a toy distracts them. You're doing it to force a specific neurological shift. Each cue requires your dog to access their cognitive brain, the part that retrieves learned behaviors, makes decisions, and responds to context. You are essentially pulling the thinking brain back into the driver's seat by giving it something to do. The pace matters. Keep the sequence fast enough that your dog cannot drift back into fixation between cues. You want them slightly mentally breathless. One cue every 2 to 3 seconds. And you want your energy to be upbeat and focused, almost playful. Not commanding, not stern. You're recruiting them into an activity, not correcting a mistake. Mark each correct response with a clear yes or a clicker, and follow with a food reward. You're stacking up a series of small wins in rapid succession. This does two things. It builds your dog's confidence in their own ability to regulate, and it builds their association between you and the feeling of competence in that triggering environment. Over time, and this typically takes 3 to 6 weeks of consistent work, you'll notice that your dog starts to orient toward you when they see the fence trigger instead of launching into the run. That's not obedience. That's a rewired default response. That's the prefrontal cortex staying online long enough to remember that checking in with you is a better deal than chasing the dopamine hit. The third tool is the look at that technique, and it is the most counterintuitive one I'll give you today. Most owners try to redirect their dog away from the trigger as quickly as possible. Look away. Come here. Leave it. The idea is to eliminate the dog's exposure to the thing causing the reaction. But this approach has a ceiling. Your dog cannot get better at tolerating the trigger if they never practice tolerating it. Look at that flips the script completely. You teach your dog that looking at the trigger, calmly and briefly, earns a reward. Here's how it works. You start at a distance where your dog can notice the trigger, but hasn't yet gone into the full arousal loop. This is called being under threshold. You wait. The moment your dog glances toward the fence or the trigger, you mark it. Yes, and you immediately redirect their gaze to you with the treat. Dog looks at trigger. Mark. Dog looks at you. Reward. What you are building here is an automatic redirect. You're teaching the dog's brain to associate the sight of the trigger with the behavior of checking in with you. The trigger becomes a cue, not just a stimulus. It's one of the most elegant reframes in behavioral science. At first, you need significant distance. Your dog might need to be 20 or 30 feet from the fence line before they can notice a trigger without going over threshold. That's fine. Start there. Over sessions, you close the distance slowly, only when your dog is consistently staying under threshold and checking back in with you. This progression typically moves in stages over 4 to 8 weeks. Do not rush it. If your dog goes over threshold during a session, you've pushed too far too fast. Step back, literally and figuratively, and rebuild from a more comfortable distance. Here's the thing about look at that makes it so powerful in the context of fence running specifically. The fence line trigger for most dogs has been paired with the dopamine hit of the sprint so many times that it has enormous neurological weight. It's not just a trigger. It's the beginning of the whole reward sequence. By intercepting that sequence at the very first moment, the glance, and redirecting it toward you before the loop can fully engage, you are essentially inserting yourself into the reward chain. You become part of the sequence. Trigger, look at handler, reward. And over enough repetitions, your dog's brain begins to restructure. The trigger no longer automatically predicts the sprint and the dopamine hit. It predicts you. And your engagement, your calm, focused presence, starts to carry its own reward value. This is what sustainable behavior change actually looks like. Not a dog who is suppressed or afraid to react. A dog who has genuinely reorganized their response to the thing that used to send them over the edge. Put all three tools together, and here's what your training week starts to look like. Every outdoor session begins with sniff games or lick mat time near the fence during quiet moments to build that new emotional baseline. When mild arousal appears, you engage rapid-fire obedience sequences to recruit the thinking brain before the loop runs. And in dedicated training sessions, you practice look at that at controlled distances, building the auto-redirect into your dog's nervous system one repetition at a time. Consistency is the whole game here. The neural pathway you are trying to replace was built over hundreds or thousands of repetitions. You're not going to undo it in a week, but with daily work, Most owners start seeing meaningful shifts within 3 to 4 weeks. The sprinting becomes less frantic. The duration shortens. And crucially, your dog starts to look back at you more often during those moments, which tells you the prefrontal cortex is staying online longer. If this video gave you a new way of understanding what's actually happening when your dog hits that fence line, I want you to do one thing before your next training session. Pick just one of these 3 tools and use it tomorrow. Not all 3, just one. The brain game at the fence, the rapid-fire cue sequence, or the first steps of look at that. Starting small and doing it consistently beats trying to overhaul everything at once and burning out by day 3. Training your dog is a relationship built in moments, not a program you complete. Take that one step. And when you start seeing those small shifts, that half-second pause before the sprint, that glance back at you instead of at the fence, that's your dog's brain starting to reorganize. That's real. Thanks for watching. If you loved this video, scan the QR code on the screen right now to subscribe and join the Pawsome Life family. Give your dog a belly rub for us, and we will see you in the next video.